Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series about the secret undercover political police who infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups in the UK, stealing dead children's identities, deceiving women into long-term sexual relationships, and in some cases fathering children. Episode 10, The Registry Files. Welcome to the Spy Cops Info Podcast. I'm Tom Fowler and I'm joined with
Donal from the Undercover Research Group.
Today we're talking about the Registry Files. These are something which is incredibly significant. They've come up at the inquiry a few times. They really go to the heart of what the whole Spy Cops thing was really all about, like what it was feeding into. Donal, do you want to explain just why the Registry Files are so significant?
There are secret files. They're what the state keeps on us. So the Registry Files, or the RF files, was the archive of intelligence gathered by Special Branch over the centuries. It's like goes back 150 years. And they're broken down to various different categories. But predominantly they are left-wing groups and individuals. Through the inquiry, we're getting to see a lot of references to them. So we'll see certain numbers attached to names and individuals. For example, if somebody is an Irish-born activist, they will quite often have a file that will start 355, left-wing 400 or 402 or 405. If it's a magazine or publication, they'll often start with 347. Films will be 346, and it's a series of numbers. The numbers I've just given you are the first set, and they sort of category designation. The second number is the year the file was open on. Now, for an organisation, this will quite often change. So, for a large organisation that exists over many years, once a file hits a certain size, they'll open a new one. So you'll see references over the different years. And the third number is simply a chronological number. So if it's 17, it means it's the 17th organisation on which a file was open in that year.
When we say, you want to be careful, son, you end up on a file, these are the files we're talking about.
Yes.
They seem quite archaic in a way, but they really are the foremost piece of technology that holds together the whole thing, right? They're the main thing.
There's several registries. There's the General Police Registry, there's the Special Branch Registry, and there's also a separate registry in MI5. And in MI5, they usually referenced as SF, or subject file, or organisation file. So a slightly different system. And it's just a repository for all the intelligence that the police have been gathering over the years. With Special Branch files, they tend to be very restricted access. It's only through the inquiry that, for the first time, many of these files have been seen, and even then, very incomplete versions. There are yet other repositories beyond that. There's something called Commander's Archive, which is where the top secret stuff is really kept. If you look at the materials coming out of the inquiry, quite a lot of them will say the organisation name, and then we'll have one of these sets of codes underneath it, and that tells you where it was filed. At the bottom of many of the reports, and it's pretty much 90% of the reports, where they've directly addressed an individual. Say, here's a list of the people who were part of the Tottenham International Socialist Babysitting Rota, which is a genuine document. So we'll have the name, and then next to the name there'll be the set number. So part of their report drafting is to identify all the individuals by file reference. And what we're seeing is that absolutely everybody has a file. You know, if you only went to a couple of meetings, the chances are you will still have that file on you. One of the things we learned recently in the inquiry was the process of opening up these files. So initially you'll see somebody and they'll just go mention an IS file, mention an International Socialist file, mention in International Marxist Group file. So that's somebody who's been spotted several times. Oh yeah, he's at the meeting. After a while, go, well, this person has been at 3 or 4 meetings. Now is the time to open up the file. Exactly how that decision was made remains to be answered. We anticipate that will be one of the questions heard at next year's hearing, the 2022 hearings, when the managers themselves get asked, because that's a decision they'll have made. But what we're seeing is a very, very, very clear pattern of Like even very, very liberal groups like local Labour Party groups, having Labour Party club would have had its own special branch file. They didn't care about whether you're parliamentary stuff, the fact you were left wing. The absence of right wing files so far is quite telling, although there are some, and they do seem to follow the same pattern, the same numbers. So there's a lot we don't know, but through seeing these references, we're getting an understanding of the breadth. Interesting. While the organisation numbers, the files are constantly being updated, so across over many different years, for an individual reference file, a registry file, the year of creation stays the same. So when you see somebody, this is Joanna Blogs 402/56/ whatever, you will know that her file was opened in 1956. So you can see that in some of the people who appeared in the inquiry, actually monitoring of them started much, much earlier.
Yeah, in some cases when they were still children.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the big questions that came out of the recent hearings was the fact that was around school kids against Nazis and the fact that reporting on children was taking place, and they quite liked. In fact, in one case, another 18-year-old did have the wrong file. Other things that have come out of the inquiries where it's clear that undercovers have been tasked to find that information, to update files, and these requests have both come from internally within Special Branch and MI5. So this process of these files are constantly under rotation, updating, although we're fairly certain that nothing was ever got rid of.
Yeah, I believe that, yeah. It's quite telling. I remember, I think it was Michael James, was it Michael James? Was being asked about some updating he'd done to some files, and literally the opening line of some of these files were like, has not been involved in politics for 3 years. Even the files themselves admit that these people are not of interest, but you've still got a file. Even though you're not a threat, you're not an issue at that exact time, you've still got a file on.
And you see constantly where they justify their intelligence thing goes, you never know when they might be of use. We didn't know that, how important this intelligence would be, and so on, so on. But it's a self-perpetuating system.
Right.
So the other thing to point out in terms of inquiry is we've been asking for our files. Even people who are co-participants and given evidence have not been shown the files. And that's partly, although we haven't been given the reason, the inquiry keeps coming up with bullshit as to why it'd be disproportionate. I personally think it's a different reason, and that it's those files wouldn't just be material from undercovers, it's from phone taps, it's from direct surveillance, it's from informers, and the reason they can't give them to us is it would expose just how extensive the spying on us were and the different techniques that were being used. So the inquiry's been really guarded when it comes to informers and telephone taps.
Well, the overt surveillance as well. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, I know, like a lot of people, a number of years ago, I did a subject access request for my police national computer file, and the information that was in that was all pretty much exclusively from overt surveillance. I saw the cop looking at me and writing things down, sort of thing. Was incredibly detailed. So we know that there are numerous databases of documents, but this is the mothership, right? This is like the main. This is the main event, which they all feed into. The level of detail is liable to be, ridiculously extensive.
It's hard to say because we've never actually seen one of these files. We've not been given proper access, even though it's a core demand. But we suspect that, it will be extensive. And they had this huge, just big brother operation. It's like George Orwell would imagine that Britain would be conducting an operation of this size and scale,
and dating back for so long. This isn't some reaction to something that happened in more recently. This has been going back since
the beginning of the police. There's been a general registry.
1829, I guess.
The first such registries would have been on political activists, and friends who've done work around Stasi and stuff like that. Have also it's like. People look to East Germany as this exceptional thing, but at the same time, what we're seeing in Britain isn't that different. And then, that's people from East Germany going, you're supposed to be the free world.
The thing which is unique about East Germany is the exposure, right?
Yes.
It's the fact that it's exposed, and I think the more we scratch at these things, it's just as as invasive a story here, right?
And this isn't just they're keeping files. Some of the stuff that's come out, there was one particular incident where it was clear that somebody lost their job because they were recorded as a political activist. Blacklisting is a huge issue, and the police will deny that, that there's any real connection between the police and the blacklisting firms and stuff. But numerous authors have spoken about how special branch files were in circulation. These are the files.
Yeah.
These are the files that help lead to people being blacklisted. When they talk about vetting for jobs, these are the files they go and look at. And what we're seeing, the material on these files are coming from unreliable sources, such as undercover officers. And ironically, they all start off from a secret and reliable source. You can't trust them. And yet they're affecting people's lives. They're affecting people's careers and the ability to get jobs.
It's an insurance policy of the government of the state, essentially, against uppity members of the population.
Yeah. And there was no reason to keep all of this, but it's like any intelligence operation becomes an intelligence operation for its own sake. And once you have that power, it's so obvious where the mission creep is. This is a unit that's set up to, to monitor protests. And so, you got access to all this other material. Well, let's use that. Becomes a justification.
Yeah.
So even though it's like the registry files are not the banner headline, they're one of those things at the heart of everything that is going on in the inquiry and the wider police state.
The inquiry's been very clear. We're not going to get to see them. Unequivocal, I would say. Has been on this topic. I think the very fact that we know of their existence and we know of the kind of, if not the content of them, the kind of the shape of what they're about. That's something in itself, right? Just the things that we're dealing with here are so secret that just like the acknowledgement of their existence and the fact that individual officers were taking out registry files, taking them to the safe house, referring to them, updating them, like the way in which they live in the system. Just our knowledge of that is a huge step forward.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where we knew about it, we suspected it, it was pretty obvious what was going on, there was enough references, oblique references. But what we're seeing in the inquiry is the first exposure of just what that system was. It's moving beyond supposition and just the simplest explanation is these files exist to no, these files are now admitted to exist, and we know the extent to which any material was being added into them and the lack of any real filtering process. Because, we know most of the files we're now actually seeing in inquiry are actually coming from MI5. They originated with the Special Administration Squad, but were sent to MI5. We're thinking, after keeping all this irrelevant stuff, it's clearly moving around.
Originally, we thought of the likes of the Special Demonstration Squad and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit as being, just like a wing of the police that was up to stuff. But we're kind of realizing now that actually it's coming from from the security services who are there's so much direction there, and it seems that the registry files are the reason for that. It's servicing that. Almost like the whole point of the operation is servicing these files as much as it is anything else.
Yes, I would draw. There's a bit of a debate about this, about how much around MI5 and Special Branch control each other. I think it's a lot more amorphous, a lot more fluid. And I don't think there's this sort of narrative that MI5 controls Special Branch. I think Special Branch quite like that narrative because absolves them of any real responsibility. I think it's much Special Branch are up there as an intelligence gathering operation in their own right, and should they may not have had the full cooperation of MI5, but they were certainly capable of running that sort of thing in London anyway. What happened in the regions elsewhere, MI5 definitely have much more control, but I think in London, Metropolitan Police were in control of the undercover operations and spying on everybody.
It's almost like rather than being like a unit that had files, there's some files that have got a unit.
Yeah, well, it's not just the unit; it's the entirety of Special Branch. I mean, we think about what the rest of Special Branch is doing. It's naturalization, so people coming in seeking citizenship, so they all get investigated. It's people at ports. Well, that's just monitoring people. You need files to tell you who to monitor. You know, it's people who are at protest meetings. It's the communists. It's the Irish. You know, all of Special Branch is focused on intelligence gathering, not necessarily not solving crime per se, but intelligence gathering. You know, and the Special Demonstration Squad is simply just an extension of they say, well, this is an efficient extension of that function. You know, we send one person into the meeting, they come back with the details and names of addresses because they've been handed around on a sheet of paper. As you know, the minutes. Whereas, you know, if you're sat outside in the car, then you've got to guess who's. I think. But we also see this when the inquiry is talking a lot about subversion, the justification for all of this. And I think this goes to your point in the connection with MI5 and Special Branch. Where Special Branch always had this pseudo narrative of it's about public order. It's so obvious from what we're hearing in the inquiry. It's all about subversion. And where I challenged the narrative around MI5 versus Special Branch is that, you know, MI5 was somehow seen having charge of subversion. Special Branch were just the same, as much on that same game.
This relationship, this involvement of the security, this was not something that anybody was really anticipating before the inquiry, was it? Were they?
We weren't anticipating them to admit it.
Right, yeah. I guess that's what I meant, really, yeah.
It came out quite gradually. It was like, I think it was the designated lawyer's statement back in October, and it was just like, and say, well, you know, all our officers were just doing what MI5 told us to do. And I was just like, oh, really? Are they actually going to say that? And it was a bit puzzling at the time because it's like, why are they coming out so explicitly? And then we started seeing the MI5 material coming out. And so over the last few months, it's been much, much clearer and much more evidence coming from MI5, including an actual corporate statement from MI5, which I don't think any of us expected ever to see. Not in public, anyway. No,
I mean, really fascinating document. Witness X. As much as anything, just the way it's written. You know, it's like it gives you an insight, I think.
Yeah, and you actually, when you unpick that document, it's like it's written by somebody who's been around long enough to have an overview. And it's like that's somebody who dealt with that intelligence, who knew about the SDS, to be around that long and to be that trusted. So yeah, I think that you've got to all these things. You've got to take it with a pinch of salt.
Sure,
but
absolutely.
it's definitely worth reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that thing. One thing which always like comes home to me with those people is that like they've got a better sense of our like collective memory than we do. they like they've been handling information about us and the movements we're part of for a very long time, and they've got like kind of a certain handle on it and a certain way of presenting information back at us. They got like an idea of how we'll receive it. Do you know what I mean? It's got that all of it is they're handling us, right? You know.
Yeah, I know. Definitely, they're in control of the narrative. They're in control of what's been released, and this is like one of the reasons why we want our files, is so we could actually understand how we're being manipulated, how by the material they're giving us is shaping us. You know, it's the sort of thing we'll give you with one hand, take away with another. Like, okay, yeah, we're great, we've been given something. Yeah, but it's like, what is being hidden?
There's a huge amount, right? I mean, that like. As much as this inquiry is this like amazing opportunity to look into the way in which an aspect of the secret state has operated for all this time, it really is the tip of the iceberg, and it's the registry files that will really give you the sense of the size of that iceberg if we were able to see inside them.
Yeah, but there are historical things going back. I think it's in Christopher Andrews' book on MI5, the official history of MI5. You know, they talk about having 1.5 million files during World War II,
when the population of Britain was a lot less than it is now.
It's one of the rare times we actually get
as
sort of a glimpse of the magnitude.
Yeah,
you know, and the inquiry keeps saying it's like, you know, we're having to filter, we're giving you the files that are relevant and scam. But you suspect that behind the scenes they are dealing with a vast quantity of stuff that they simply don't know how to process or can't, got the capacity to process.
You really get this vision of a incredible, just the incredibly detailed surveillance state that we've got in this country, just having to eke out these bits of information to this inquiry because of political reasons they have to do, and just hold the stuff they're holding back and the way in which they operated being held back.
We've been looking at these for years. People have been, parapolitics, people have been writing and doing about this for years. And this has been advantage to work out, there's many theories, there's many concepts doing it. And this giving us an opportunity to say, well, the Secret State was probably working within this band, in this particular way. We know which ones to ignore more now, or which ones are less unlikely. There'll always be people who go, I will give all power and might to the state and believe, the worst of the worst. I think it's far, this is a bunch of people as crap and useless as anybody else as it comes down to it. It doesn't mean they're not effective, but you've got to throw that in. You've got to throw in the fact that they are a huge bureaucracy, and so that's the other thing that comes out of these files. It's a bureaucracy, and so part of the analysis of the police has to be of them as a vast bureaucracy that exists for itself. And as you were saying a few months ago, it's like the files are the heart of the organisation, because it's fundamentally bureaucratic. And you see in some of the witness statements, it's like, I was told I was tasked to find a bit of information. And yes, and it's like robotic. At the end of the day, so by tomorrow morning, I want you to have found the name and the address of this person, blah blah, or whatever it was. So they they had no idea what this person was. They just bare minimum, went to an IMG meeting in Walthamstow, therefore of interest somewhere along the line. They don't question, they just go and find this information, and it's just constantly feeding in. And there's nobody setting out a clear and coherent analysis of why this bureaucracy needs to exist. Now, we think there's a set of documents called Commissioner's Reports,
right,
which may go way down to that, but they're refusing to release them to us, even though they're supposed to be public. So,
what are the Commissioner's Reports?
They're reports by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to the Home Office saying, this is all the wonderful stuff we've done through the year.
Right.
And within that, there should be stuff on the wonderful stuff the Special Branch have been doing on protests and things. So it's a way of measuring what they value as success. And if you've got something where you're just like, well, you've got this entire well-funded organisation, what are you doing? How are you measuring it? Or are you just existing for the sake of existing? And when you see, it's like when you've got millions of files and your entire organisation is just keeping those files up to date, what are you actually doing?
There's no end game in that, is that it's a never-ending cycle. It just keep growing.
Yeah. And you'll see offshoots where they'll clearly go after a particular group, after animal rights, or they will go they'll channel stuff towards the Economic League and blacklisting and stuff. But the vast majority isn't actually serving a particular purpose, but it's all justified with it might become useful.
Yet another of the things that we kind of discover through this process, which just it's kind of mind-boggling in its scale and its scope. And you start seeing this isn't just about a particular small part of the police that we're focusing on protest. This is about the political shape of the country, right? And it's about the way in which the society in which we live is influenced, more than it's controlled by the state, because they've got so much information on anybody who could be deemed to be a subversive in some way, and see the links that exist within that so quickly and so early. It's one of these things you just think, oh fucking hell. What we're up against, man.
Yeah. But this is all about network analysis. One of my favourite phrases, sorry. But it's once you have an insight on where to look, being able to take that information and blow it up and say, right, if I know to look at this group, then I know everything about that group already. I just need to get that insight. And the undercover said, right, you need to look at this group. And suddenly you have everything mapped. So it's about that, but that means treating everybody as a criminal. So, to my mind, what effectively happened was criminalisation of anybody seeking change, and it was very much because why else would you keep a file on them if you didn't consider them criminal in some way? It doesn't matter that they were seen as threat. And I think sometimes that language is used in a way of can obscure what was actually going on. So, well, I'm not a threat, therefore I wouldn't have a file on me. It's like, it's just, no, it's criminalizing change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And criminalising change, man. I think that really sums it up. That it's about fighting social progress. I mean, is a phrase I've used a few times, but I think it is. It's trying to stop social change, like literally.
The other weird thing I think we find within these files is just, you get to a point where you're overwhelmed by the amount of stuff.
Right.
It's like reading these hundreds of files coming in, because we're just seeing one fraction. It's like, if the intelligence gathering operation is that big, where it's not just spike ops, it's all the other stuff. It's like people are having to process that. Was this really intelligence gathering? And that's kind of led to an ongoing investigation of just how the intelligence gathering process has been taking place over the years and how computerizing is investigated. And there are quite a few tantalizing clues within various official documents. So the Inspectorate Constabulary reports into Mark Kennedy talk about the photographic archives and how they had to basically sit on the police to get them to delete loads of photographs. There's one fascinating document, well, fascinating to me as a surveillance geek, where they talk about the original domestic extremism database.
Right.
Where they had a problem. They couldn't modify or delete the records because it was so full. It'd run out of space. So they end up having to go through it and select which records to manually copy across to the new database.
Right.
But it's just like, if you're running out of space because you've got no filters going on. Something we've been tracking is the ongoing change, and in particular there's something called the National Intelligence Model, which was brought in 1999. This is one of those sort of slightly geekery things. But if you want to really understand how what we're seeing in inquiry happening in the 70s and 80s is happening now, you have to understand the National Intelligence Model. And most people haven't heard of it. It's one of those things that exists within the police world. But it's about making intelligence manageable. It's about working out, when you've got this vast amount of intelligence, you have to go, well, what actually is useful? What's the criteria? You've got a bunch of essentially grunts or low-grade analysts going, I don't know if this babysitting rota. Sorry, I'm obsessed with that babysitting rota.
I mean, it's very illustrative of what it's like, isn't it?
Is this relevant? So, where most people will see this within the inquiry-related stuff, and particularly for core participants who've already seen stuff around the Drax or the Ratcliffe stuff, is these 5x5x5 forms, which we've got some examples on our website. And these are the intelligence sheets which grade, here's the raw intelligence or the raw information. It's graded by source, it's graded by reliability, and it's graded by who needs to see it and the impact. So this is the modern incarnation of that stuff, of what we were seeing in inquiry in the registry files, and this is the material that will be going in and feeding into that information. And we're seeing a lot of the same sort of stuff in terms of content. It's the same trivia, but it's designed in a way to actually process it more effectively, to work out what the police need, rather than just get swamped by Mark Kennedy staying at one place one night, whatever, going to a party somewhere and making stuff up. And there's also, this has been tied in with computerization, so understanding what the computer systems are, what the capabilities are, so we can see where the Special Branch Registry became the National Domestic Extremism Database, which has now become something slightly else. And they're still ongoing. They're still in development, and yet growing incarnations can be spotted in the paperwork. But also the degree to which these are integrated nationally in network. Because the thing about the Metropolitan Police is, they said, various people said, information went into the Metropolitan Police but never came out.
Right, yeah.
So they would get intelligence from all the regional police forces, but the regional police forces wouldn't necessarily get intelligence from the Met. So one of the things we've been tracking is, well, how much actually sharing is going on. The inquiry has told us, well, MI5 got everything.
Right.
The degree to it, that is clear as daylight. But we're also now by tracking the registry files, the history of the registry files and stuff, we're now starting to see just how much more integration there is going within the police computers while the various programs that are being set up in order to facilitate the sharing of that information. Because it's not as cut and dry as, many of us like to be. We all go, yeah, police know everything and they tell all the other police everything. It's really not like that.
No.
I argue against that sort of position because I think it's really disempowering. I think it gives the state this all-powerful, all-efficient persona it really doesn't deserve. And I think people just go, well, the state's all-powerful, I can't do anything against it. It's like, it's nowhere near as powerful.
No.
My investigations into how even just the files are circulated show that it's a lot weaker than I would like us to believe.
That is part of the reason for the way in which they operate is to project power, isn't it? It's not possible for any institution to be like that. The fact that they know things about you shouldn't stop you from taking action. It's something we keep coming back to on this series, is that how important it is to not allow these things to stop you from taking action. And I want to reiterate it again, really, is that just because there's a file on you doesn't mean you can't operate. Yeah. Doesn't mean that you can't be a successful campaigner. Doesn't mean you can't be an effective activist.
Yeah, and I've had personal experience where it shows that, I know they've got files on me. Yeah. I know there was probably quite extensive files on me, but it really didn't mean they... I can give an example. I'm from Northern Ireland, so it's relevant. And the files in Northern Ireland were kept in a place called Castlereagh, which was raided by the IRA at one point. When I was approached to be in Grass, I was up on quite serious charges at the time, and they thought they could put pressure on me. So they called me and they were trying to get me to answer questions and trying to get me to come over to their side, which actually I did say no to. But from the way and what they were asking me, it gave me insights. They were asking me, was I living with anybody? Well, I've been living with my partner for 2 years at that point. We shared a house. So it's like, well, surely you would know that. You wouldn't have to ask me that. Certainly Lancashire police would have known that. Okay, so London police don't. That's a bit weird. And then I said, okay. Oh, of course, because Castlereagh's been raided, you wouldn't have the file on me. And they were going, what's Castlereagh got to do with anything? And it dawned on me, they didn't even realise I was Irish.
Right.
And, and this wasn't me just having turned up and been active for a few months. I've been active for 15 years by this stage. So it gives me, yes, you may have all this material, but it doesn't mean that you're actually processing it or useful.
Yeah.
And I was in a situation where I was getting arrested in Ireland on a protest, and the cop was screaming in my face, "Who are you? Give me your name, give me your name." And I was going, okay, so the British police haven't shared intelligence with the chief cop in Rossport. So I know the people will disagree and still want to say, well, yeah, the police have everything. Anyway, to me, they were both examples. Yes, you may have information, but you don't know everything. You can't process everything. And frankly, it didn't stop me doing a whole bunch of actions anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is the key takeaway, I think, to what everything we talk about is that they can't, just because they've got all this information on us doesn't mean they can stop us from doing things. As ever, if you want to find out more about this topic or listen to any of our previous episodes, check out spycops.info. Please follow and like the podcast series wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're able to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. We're grateful to the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance for supporting us with equipment, and for the Public Space for giving us studio space.